Good evening and welcome to IDG's Chit Chat Live for the week of July 20th, 2015. In today's episode, we will be having an interview with Cece Moore, genetic genealogy consultant. Hello.
Hey,
Welcome to Chit Chat. My name is Shannon Combs-Bennett. I'm the creative director for the In-Depth Genealogist. Joining me today are Jennifer Offord, publisher, Terry O'Connell, executive director, and our special guest, Cece Moore, joining us. Thanks, Cece, for being here. We're really excited to have you.
thank you for having me.
Um, we like to have chit chats about all sorts of different subjects, and as a person who enjoys genetic genealogy, I've been wanting to have you on here for a while to help my associates here who always ask me lots and lots of questions. Now I don't feel like I'm being teamed up on.
Well, at least you have a good person to ask questions to, ladies.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, Shannon is very patient with us.
It does take patience for sure. It's such a big learning curve for so many people. Genealogists who, had put their science classes behind them. They thought for good. It is, I think, a difficult thing to get started doing, but it's well worth it once you've done it.
I try to encourage that. I think it's a good thing.
Well, you break it down very well for the non-scientific people, and to me, that's important because I hated science.
Mm-hmm.
So
I have to say, Cece, some of your presentations I've been to have been very enlightening, very entertaining, and coming from a science background, there are moments when I go into a presentation when it's science-based and I kind of take a sigh because I'm never quite too sure how it's going to go. But
go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say, as you've probably noticed, I don't go too deeply into the science. I don't think it's that necessary for us to do that. We're really just trying to apply the principles to genealogy, and so that doesn't necessarily require a science background. And as you probably know, I don't have a science background.
Mm-hmm.
So when I teach it, I'm trying to teach it for people who, like me, don't necessarily understand all of the scientific terms and just want to use it for their family tree research.
Now, for those people who are joining us who may not know exactly who or what you do, can you give us like a real brief, a little bit about your background and how you got started?
Yes, so it was really kind of a fluke. I didn't go to school for science and genetics like you did. I was actually a music major and worked in film and television, and genealogy was just a hobby of mine. I was obsessed, of course, like I think all of us are. Spent a lot of time on it, but it wasn't my career. And when autosomal DNA was introduced for genealogy is when I really jumped in with both using as I am with autosomal DNA, because it really opened up the inner branches and allowed women to be able to use their own DNA for so much more. So I started writing a blog after I tested a number of my family members. I was encouraged to write up my research to help others. And at that time, we really were just, we had expected data, but not observed data because it was so brand new. This is end of 2009, beginning of 2010, when 23andMe had just introduced it. And so I started writing about what I was seeing in the data and how much it was falling into what we expected and how much it wasn't, how the ranges of the expected sharing was more than maybe some of us thought. And I didn't expect to get so many followers so fast. I think it was just I was in the right place at the right time with the right interests, and also the fact that I wasn't speaking in scientific terms must have helped a lot. And it just kind of went from there. I started speaking, and next thing I knew, I had my whole life taken over by genetic genealogy, and here I am now.
Well, I'm actually kind of excited to hear those dates you put out because I came to more of a less of a casual, I guess, observer to genealogy itself in the early 2010. So I had my father tested for the first time, I guess late 2010. My father was tested in 2011 using Y-DNA, and I just kind of went off from there. So I'm actually not too far behind. Yay!
Yeah, I had tested my dad earlier. When I was first interested was probably 2003. I wanted to test my grandmother, but at that time I didn't have the funds to do it. It was much more expensive. So I just sat back and observed for a few years, and then I tested my dad and myself in 2008. But like I said, I wasn't quite as invested in it until autosomal DNA happened. So I'm more of a latecomer to it as compared to some of the people who had surname projects and things way back in 2000, 2001.
Right. And that's one thing I've noticed, pardon me, with the decrease in the cost of tests, more and more people are seeing it as a viable research tool or an opportunity, especially when they're trying to find um, missing branches of their family. I was at a family reunion in Detroit last weekend, and I had put out an email like a year ago asking people if they wanted to test. We're trying to figure out where my mother's paternal surname came from. It's a whole long torrid affair there. And everyone was kind of lukewarm at that time. But a year later, without me, I don't want to nag my family, so I tend not to. But I was approached by 7 or 8 people within the first half an hour of my family reunion who are all like, do we give you our spit now? Do you send us something? And I was like, whoa, what is going on here?
Yeah, it's really changed. I was fortunate that my family, although their eyes glazed over when they were more than willing to give me their spit. And they have never been worried about genetic privacy, so I was able to test them and blog about it, use it in my presentations and things. But the general public, it's changed tremendously. I mean, the change from 2010 till today, or even 2013 till today, is just amazing. I mean, I really feel like we've hit critical mass as far as autosomal DNA testing for people who have deep roots in the United States. For a long time, it was very hard to break down any brick walls. We spent thousands of hours trying to use our data for our genealogy purposes, and it was few and far between that you would actually have some sort of brick wall that tumbled because of it. And in the last, say, year and a half, the success stories have just exploded, and I'm sure you've all heard about a lot of them. But it's changed people's opinions. Media has covered it a lot more, and that's one of the things that I focus on, is I'm trying very hard to get positive genetic genealogy stories into the media, because that encourages many more testers, and that helps all of us with our research.
Right, and I have to say that the one story that a lot of the people who have issues with genetic genealogy are now clinging on to is that one with the Oregon, I think I have it right, the Oregon police and Ancestry. Oh, well, it's not Ancestry, but that's who everyone likes to blame it on. And I understand what happened, but there are enough people out there who don't understand and think that, even though we know the GINA Act is available, and that people, insurance companies and the government, if they want your DNA, they're going to, have to come and get it from you. They can't actually go to genetic genealogy companies. That is a real fear among people.
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and unfortunately the media very much contributed to that misunderstanding in the case that you're referencing. Ancestry DNA didn't allow them to do anything until they had a court order. And there was some media that claimed that Ancestry had just allowed them to go through their private database with the identifying information. And that wasn't the case. What did happen is the investigators used the publicly available Sorensen database, smgf.org, and compared the YSTR, so the Y chromosome DNA results, from their law enforcement case to that. And anyone could do it. It was publicly available. You didn't need to ask for permission to do that. Some of the confusion is because the tests that they ran was done by Sorensen Forensics. And Sorensen Forensics is completely different than Sorensen Molecular Genealogy Foundation. So people thought it was the same lab processing the DNA as it was being compared to the database, and it wasn't. So, of course, law enforcement could always serve a subpoena like they did in this case and get identifying information. It's going to be very rare. We've been doing, this was Y-DNA, which has already been being used for 15 years, over 15 15 years, a few of these types of cases. So it's really not a major concern, mainly because if, like you said, if they want your DNA, they're going to come and get it. If you apply for life insurance, they're going to show up and collect your DNA anyway, in many cases. And if law enforcement wants it, then they'll get it. I mean, in many states, you can go through the trash and take someone's cash and test their DNA for it. So they've done that here in California, familial DNA testing. Some states have outlawed it, but not all. So, you know, I understand people's reticence for that reason, but I think that it is an extremely unusual situation where that's even going to come into play.
Right. I just found it unfortunate that there was such a large positive upswing, and all of a sudden there was this boom.
Yeah. And that's happened a couple times. There was a media article about, I think it was called, I Gave My Parents the Gift of Divorce with Genetic Testing.
I read that one.
And it did the same thing as well. And again, it was full of misinformation. So the media likes to hype these things up when they get the chance. They're always looking for negative stories. And in both cases, a lot of people were misinformed, and it was really unfortunate because it did discourage some people from testing who otherwise may have done so.
Right. So Terry, Jen, do either of you have anything that you would like to know about?
I do. Last in June, there was the Global Family Reunion, and I was a host for the Ohio Genealogical Society, and great responses to your presentation. I wanted to hear about your experiences with the reunion.
A little crazy because I had to speak at Southern California Genealogical Society Jamboree on Thursday, their DNA day. I had 3 speeches. Then I had to fly to New York and do that, the speech at Global Family Reunion on Saturday. So it was kind of a whirlwind. Also, they only gave me 25 minutes, and it's really hard to talk about all the things I want to talk about in only 25 minutes. So I had to keep cutting my presentation down more and more and more. And I finally decided that I was going to take out a lot of the technical things, a lot of the steps that I took on the cases of those that were my own. And just try to let people know about the power of genetic genealogy and get them inspired, since it was supposed to be kind of a wider audience than I would normally see at a conference or an institute where somebody wants a case study. So that's how I finally crammed all that in there. And obviously my goal was just to get people to test, to get people interested. So it was a lot of fun, but then I had to fly right back out again, so it was a very quick thing for me. I did one interview with AJ, I think, and I even missed the film crew was there for Finding Your Roots, and I didn't even end up hooking up with them. So it was, you know how it is when you're speaking. Sometimes you don't get to partake in all of the festivities.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit exhausting.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
It's hard to say no to things like that. I keep saying I'm going to cut down on travel, and then I get an invitation like that, and, you know, how can you say no?
Right.
Right. Yeah, it was an awesome event. I really enjoyed it, and you know, we didn't have a huge group at our thing, but everyone was just really getting into the different talks. And Henry Louis Gates, he did great. A lot of people were laughing and, you know, understanding what was going on and everything. So it was kind of like, you know, getting together with a bunch of your friends to see, you know, people that you admire. So I really enjoyed it, and I know a lot of people are hoping that next year they do something similar and get to do it again.
It sounded like they were going to. I don't know anything official, but I noticed on one of the flyers or one of the websites it said something like annual event.
Yeah.
So must be happening again. I'll have to write AJ and ask him for more details. I haven't done that yet.
Yeah,
Terry,
awesome.
Sorry, go ahead, Jen. Oh, Terry, did you have a question?
Well, speaking of finding your roots, it seems lately there's been a lot of TV shows that come on and that involve genetic genealogy, but they all seem to be one season. So we had Pam Slayton's TV show, I think, that she did with Oprah. Troy Dunn has a new show every year. It doesn't. They seem to follow the same thing. He's looking for people. They're using, genetic genealogy for it. Do you see this kind of happening more? Like Troy's new show is on some odd TV network that I've never heard of. I can't watch it. So I'm just kind of wondering if we think there's going to be more out there coming.
I've never seen Troy use DNA. Is he using it on his new show?
I thought he did.
I've
spoken.
I could be wrong, but I've always just seen him do traditional search methods. Same with Pam Slayton. In both cases, they, as far as I know, are not involved in DNA research. But I can imagine that they would want to be, considering how many cases we're able to solve that were unsolvable before. As far as media, I get a lot of inquiries from media companies that are interested in integrating DNA somehow in their shows. But you know how it is, most of them never make it to air. I mean, that's TV. I'm sure there's going to be more. I mean, there's enough interest right now that some of these shows are going to have to make it on air. But I think it's sort of brand new to the industry as far as thinking about this outside of just a regular genealogy show and using it in reality type shows, and we'll see. But yeah, I think there'll be more. I don't know that it'll always be applied in the way that we would most be interested in it. I think there'll be some gimmicks and having to do a test and I don't know what, try different things with it. Right now there's that one from BYU TV, Relative Race. So they're using it in a really cool way. So people are racing across the United States meeting their DNA cousins.
That's cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's a great concept. And hopefully that will encourage more people to test. But I can also imagine ways you might use it that might not be in our best interests as a community.
Right.
Well, that's always the salacious part of media and television, right?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of ones that have wanted to do on-air reveals with me that I'm not really, in most cases, I'm not really supportive of on-air reveals when you're reuniting two very close family members. Of course, there's exceptions. There's times where they both want to do that, and it's a positive enough situation that there's no problem with it. But you don't really know that until after the fact. And so you take a case and you film it all the way from the beginning, hoping that you're going to get this on-air reunion at the end. I've had to advise them many times that there's no guarantee that those people will want to do an on-air reunion, and I wouldn't feel that it was ethical to make them sign something saying, I'll only work on your case if you agree to go on air. So there's been a lot of opportunities to do something like that that I just haven't felt comfortable with yet. Not to say that it will. For the most part, that's what they want. TV wants these very emotional reunions where they get to film people from beginning to end. And it's just a very sensitive thing when you're working with people of unknown parentage. And I don't want people taking advantage of.
Yeah, no, that's definitely understandable.
There's also the ones that I find interesting are the ones that they occasionally show, or even in my own work or hearing other people talk, when they've taken a test and the test results don't come back the way they expected to, positive or negative. I'm going to tell a story now on Terry and Jen, because when we were in Salt Lake City for Roots Tech in February, we were watching the Genealogy Roadshow, and there was a case on there where the gentleman was like, oh, I know I'm not 100% anything. I have to be of, multiple ethnic backgrounds because this is America, and no one's like 100% European or white or whatever. And then it comes out that he didn't have anything that he thought he had but 100% European. And he actually kind of looked, when they told him that, a little crestfallen. Yeah, he was from a biracial family, and he wanted to be able to share with his daughter his heritage, and now he kind of felt, it looked like on air he was a little crushed.
Yeah.
But I can, and in my own work, I've had people who look at me and they said, but I know I have this background. Why is it not showing up? And, you kind of have to
Usually
explain to
native,
them.
right?
It's either that or the one the one woman who I keep trying to explain to her, and it's been 2 years now. She doesn't understand why her third great grandmother, who was German, she has no German DNA showing up, and I'm like, I'll try to explain again.
Well,
Where was it from?
yeah, there's no such thing as German DNA. I mean, I think that's one of the challenges. Is people think that these tests are much more exact than they are. Like the one you're talking about on Genealogy Roadshow, too. I think I would have emphasized to him that there's still a lot of diversity within the 100% European.
Right.
So he might have Southern European and Northern European in different areas, but when you get to that very specific prediction, like Germany versus Scandinavia versus British Isles, as you're well aware, Shannon, you got to take it with a big dose of salt. I think, as Judy Russell says, it's not soup yet. And in some cases, it may never be. I mean, I don't know that we'll ever be able to distinguish between German DNA and French DNA because the borders have changed so often, and there's been so much, mixing of that population. And same with Scandinavia versus British Isles. Some of that is just always going to be very challenging to be able to specify, to such a small degree. And I think that's something that people need to understand a lot more. And so I try to get that out there, but it feels a no-win situation because there's always new people who test that that's what they're most interested in. They're coming into this because they want to know that pie chart. And so we're always to repeat this information over and over. I feel really confident in most cases about the global percentages, so European versus African versus Asian. Since I have so many opportunities to see people who've tested all three companies, I can see that those numbers are really quite consistent, maybe a couple points different, but very rarely do I see more than a 2 or 3% difference.
Oh, that's
but yeah, but if you look at three people who tested at the three companies, or you look at one person, sorry, who's tested at all three companies, when you get to that sub-regional, good luck. It's very rarely consistent. And so if people test it more than one, they are going to be very confused.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, we did a show highlighting the different ethnic charts on the different companies because I've tested with all three. And they found that very fascinating because it was just there was just enough variation. It was pretty consistent, and then 23andMe on one of their sub-regionals for me threw in a wrench that I'm like, I have no idea what that is, but it's so low of percentage, I'm completely ignoring it. Just block it out of your mind. You didn't see the Japanese listed there.
Is it Japanese?
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that pop up a couple, but like you said, in really low percentages. And one thing I like about 23andMe is you can go up and change the drop-down menu, so you can look to see how confident they are about that. So I don't know if you showed that, but you can go from speculative to standard to conservative. And if something stays at the conservative level, then it might be worth looking into. If it disappears as you're going up higher and higher confidence, then I wouldn't put nearly as much effort and time into something like that.
Yeah, it was there at the bottom too, but then by the time you get to the conservative one, there's a I can't remember what it is now. I think it's still there, but it doesn't say Japanese anymore. It just says like Asian.
Well, then there's something. You've got something going on.
Oh no, we won't tell my family that because they'll come back with the Indian princess story again.
Yeah, now to me that's the one that people get really disappointed about. That's the one I hear the most probably, is they think that they have that Native American, oftentimes princess, Cherokee princess, and then they get no Native or even Asian DNA. And I think that's one of the hardest things to explain to people because I feel like you can never tell someone they absolutely don't have any Native American. They don't have a full-blooded Native American ancestor in the last, say, 6 generations. But many of these stories come from further back.
Right.
And no, they don't have a princess, but I rule out certain things when you're looking at distant ancestry.
Right.
Yeah, when your grandmother was full-blooded, it's a little more, a little clearer that something's wrong with that story.
Right.
It's important to know that Shannon's been told her whole life she descends from Pocahontas' sister.
Would you stop? Would you stop?
It's a great story, Grandma.
She never told you that story.
Well,
Specific, Shannon. That's an awesome story.
Shannon, you're not going to tell me?
Okay, so so my grandmother was very proud of my grandfather's heritage. She didn't like to talk a lot about hers because she was just of Irish and German immigrants, and they weren't here very long. So she always touted and told the stories that were told to her by my grandfather's family genealogist, which was his aunt. And I figured out that, unfortunately, she did get the paperwork crossed. We're not descended from this John Combs from just outside of, you know, Jamestown on the James River in colonial Virginia. That's a different Combs family. But in somewhere she found that this man had married a Powhatan woman. And my grandmother had got it into her head from hearing from my Aunt Eliza Jane that this woman was of the same tribe as Pocahontas and was one of her younger sisters, and he married her, and we have this Powhatan princess. See, it's not Cherokee, it's Powhatan. Princess in our family, and you should be proud because you have this long lineage, and she's like, you know, your great whatever aunt. And I was like, oh wow, as a child. And then I grow up and I'm like,
So you documented it's not even the right family?
Yeah. That I did document because there's actually a really good book that was put out. There's a lot of Combses, believe it or not, in Virginia and in the eastern coast area. But when your name means valley in those type of Celtic languages, you get kind of popular in certain areas. And she had mislinked our family to one of these large Virginian families. It didn't help that that they had found out that the furthest ancestor we could get back was born in Virginia in the 1790s. We just don't know exactly where, so they had merged the two lines. But no, I don't think I am. I proved that that one was wrong, that the link was
It's
wrong.
an awesome story. She was so specific.
She was very specific.
Well, have you tried doing the Y DNA on the 2 Combs families to see if they're related?
Yes, actually. That was one of the first tests I had my dad take, and he is a part of the Combs surname study. There's a Combs Family Association, very large group. They have over 1,000 people that have taken the Y test. My father doesn't match anyone in the database.
Oh. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, including the ones that are John Combs and the 8 Combses. He had 8 sons, is who my grandmother had tied us into, and most of them had moved to Kentucky, and some of them and then spread out from there. We're not related to them. The Y DNA does not come back as a match. There was a hope when the first initial test came through that my dad was actually a descendant of a man that they had back to Dorset. And when we upped it from a 25 to a 37, that went away.
Oh. So did you have the map at 25 with this other Combs man?
We had a match with 2 differences at 25.
Right, so that's definitely borderline. Yeah, see, I have a similar problem with my Moore line, which is my maiden name, still my name. We have a match at 33 out of 37 to another Moore family. And it's the Moore family that came over with Palatines, which was M-O-H-R, but then morphed to be spelled like mine is. But my family thinks that my Moores are Irish. So I've been working on this since 2008, 2007 actually when I first started looking at it, but 2008 when I got my dad's test. And I've not been able to make any progress with it. I mean, partly because I don't have time to work, unfortunately, but I need to track down some Moores going up the tree to make sure that we really are Moores and that it's not just a coincidence that match with that other family. And then I need to get someone who's willing to upgrade to 67 from that family because the original tester doesn't respond anymore. And so I need to trace some people, test them, and if we match at 67, then that's pretty good evidence that we're actually the Palatine Moors and not the Irish Moors.
Right.
Which is interesting also because I'm brick-walled, but there's somebody on Ancestry.com who has our line going back to Ireland. And I've asked and asked and asked for documentation. I've never gotten it. But of course it spreads out across the internet. And even if I'm able to disprove it, I don't know that I can catch all of those trees grown out of control. But it'd be good to know after all this time. I mean, it was one of the first things I really tried to tackle with genetic genealogy, and I still haven't all these years later.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to do with my dad's line. I'm trying, unfortunately, the lines around him are all dottering out. So I'm having to go back further and further generations and work down to find a male. I found my dad's second cousin, who is, a direct descendant of the common ancestor, and his sister is working on getting me the contact information because he doesn't live very far from her. And she's like, "Send me the kit. I'll show up on his doorstep." I even had my dad's brother tested just so he had somebody to match in the database because he felt so lonely.
Right.
And they were both happy to say they had the same father, but it's just now proving if they're not matching anybody, and it's a pretty large, I mean, almost 1,000 tests is a pretty large database, I would think. I don't know, maybe there are larger ones out there, but they're having continual people testing, and it gets bigger every year. And to have no matches, it seems like there might be something not quite right. And I have to say my dad's a little disappointed because he grew up thinking he was Scottish and they don't match the Scottish families. But
yeah, it's very similar to mine because Moores obviously is also a huge project. And we don't match anyone in the project except for that one sort of distant match. So I tested my second cousin to make sure that that their line and my line really are descended from the same great-grandfather, and they are. So that's why I need to go back to third cousins and fourth and fifth and see if at some point there's a disconnect. Because I'm not even, like you, totally confident that Moore is the genetic last name.
Right.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it is. I think Y-DNA testing, a lot of people are sort of forgetting about it in favor of autosomal DNA. But it still really has a lot of use for our research because it's so specific. You're either going to get the match or you're not.
Right.
With autosomal DNA, get past second cousins, you can't really disprove a theory. You can use it to prove a theory with enough data, or at least to help support a theory. Mm-hmm. But if you're trying to say that two people aren't related, if they're third cousins on paper, say, and they don't get a DNA match, that didn't disprove the relationship. And with Y-DNA, if you don't get that match, there's no relationship. So I still like to use it a lot, and I use it in conjunction with autosomal DNA every chance I get. So when it's a male in question, it's really great to be able to use both of those tools.
Right, and that's another thing I don't think a lot of people take into account. They think they will take a DNA test and be able to solve all their problems, not realizing that sometimes you have to use it in conjunction with multiple tests and paper genealogy to get a full picture of what is possible in your past.
Yeah, that's such a good point, and it's so important to remember that this is, I mean, as much as I'm a huge proponent of DNA testing, it's just another tool for genealogists, and it's not the end-all, be-all, though sometimes it can show that you've gone the wrong direction in your paper trail research, even if you were, very thorough. Sometimes paper lies, DNA doesn't. But in most cases, using them together should lead you in the same direction, not in opposite directions. And I think that because it's so popular, some people think they'll just go and test, and then all the work's going to be done. And hopefully they don't think that. People who say, you know, I tested and it was a total waste because I have no idea what to do with it. And they've made it a separate thing from their traditional research or their paper trail research, and forgot that they just need to integrate that to have it be meaningful for their research. So that's something we can't say enough, is got to integrate every tool you have, every type of DNA. I use mtDNA, y-DNA, xDNA, and autosomal DNA, all in conjunction with each other, and in conjunction with the traditional research that we've been using for much, much longer than DNA.
Right.
I wonder if we'll start seeing more like of the lineage societies incorporating DNA into it. Like, I know DAR has opened it up, but I'm sitting here and all I've got going through my head is my Richmond brick wall that supposedly goes to the Mayflower. And my God, can I get somebody to test to see if it goes through?
You know, it's the lineage. I think society should be using it more, but it's hard to use it when you don't fully understand it. So with DAR, I'm glad that they're starting to use it again, but some of their standards or rules for using it don't make a lot of sense to me as a genetic genealogist. To say you have to have an exact match, which I believe is one of the rules.
So I took the class. I'm a DAR member. So
Okay, good.
I can answer these questions for you, because I was like, I am taking this course that they're putting online through the DAR because I want to know what the heck they're doing. But what you have to do is you have to find someone who is proven through that line already, who has a living direct line paternal descent. So obviously a woman you'd have to either, you know, her father would have to be still alive, or like an uncle or a brother, somebody with the same surname. Mm-hmm. Then what you have to do is put together your lineage with a proof concept of, this is why I think, even though there's not a 100% airtight paper trail, and then you have to prove, you know, have your father, uncle, brother test. And if they are a 37 match, you can submit the two applications. So basically the already proven application as supplementary supporting documentation that, look, this person's been accepted. This is how this man is related to her. He matches this man, and this is how this man is related to me. Like, you have to prove the birth certificates and all that kind of stuff. And then you submit both of them together, and the DAR will look at it.
That was my understanding. So,
okay.
So what I was saying is correct in that I think that's a little silly, for lack of a better term, to say they have to be 37-37, because fathers and sons say often, but you know, it's not extremely rare that a father and son are 36-37, and we've seen 35-37s between brothers, father, son, first cousins. So that's what I meant by, I think it's difficult to use it when you don't fully understand the field. Right. And so I'd like to see it used more.
I think this was their baby step. You know, we're going to put our toes in. And
I'm happy they took it. Yeah. I don't mean to be critical. I'm just saying, when I look at that, I think that's going to really eliminate a lot of people. And also, it could rule in some people that it shouldn't be, because it still doesn't prove descent from that person. Right. It could be a first cousin, you know, somebody who's related to that person further back. And so I'm glad that they're looking at it in conjunction with the paper trail. Of course, that's really important. But it's definitely a challenge, I think, if you have to have a 37-37 match. That's
right. And those were all the questions that were going through my head. And the only thing I can think of is that they do, on occasion, accept from professional genealogists proof cases. So to me, if I had somebody come to me and say, I can't get in, they didn't accept it, I'm a 36, 37, or 35, 37, I could, as a professional, write a proof case explaining that
Mm-hmm.
information. And that's why I've encouraged, I'm going to have the DAR police show up on my doorstep if they see this. But, I'm thinking, I've encouraged some people who were like, well, I don't know if I should do this. I think DNA is the only way I can prove it. And so I've kind of like pulled them aside and said, this is what I would do. If you're going to do this, keep these things in mind and see what happens. I mean, worst they can say is no.
Well, like you said, it's their baby step in, and I'm glad they're taking it. And maybe exactly what you just described is what will happen. They'll start considering 36, 37, 35, 37 matches when it's part of a proof statement. I mean, if there's lots of other circumstantial evidence and you have that, I'm hoping that maybe they'll give a little bit more leeway.
Right.
But it needs to be seen. I think the lineage societies would be smart of them to start incorporating DNA as much as they can, partly because it is so much a part of what we're doing in genealogy research now. So if they don't, they kind of look behind the times, at least from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Of course, there is the flip side. I've had women at some of my meetings when they've come up to me because they know I do genetic genealogy, and they're worried that lines are going to be disproven.
Yeah. That's a legitimate worry.
Yeah. And so far the stance is if it's proven through the paper genealogy, we're not going to do anything about it. Usually now for the DAR, you have to disprove service to get kicked out or have a really horrible, like a very old proven lineage that's just really, really bad for them to go, no, you have to reprove this patriot. But it could be a real concern for some people. Never know.
Well, I know of some cases that lines have been disproven through Y-DNA that are accepted in the DAR. So it is a legitimate concern for people, but the truth is the truth. I mean, I'm sorry if it does disprove some lines, but obviously they weren't really descended the way they thought anyway. Yes. There's some.
If you think about like the non-paternal events that nobody knows about, those people are proving their ancestor that truly isn't their ancestor because somebody lied in a document.
Yeah, well, it's a slippery slope. I mean, if we could DNA test everybody and we could, I hate to say this, but dig up our ancestors and DNA test them, which I don't suggest, there's a lot of things we would learn. A lot of our paper genealogy is incorrect. I mean, it's just the way it is. If every generation there's between a 2% and a 10% misattributed paternity rate, or non-paternity rate, they call it, think about that. Every single generation, you're multiplying that. Even if it's only 2%, which I don't believe from my work, I think it's much closer to the 10%. That just multiplies and multiplies and multiplies. And if you get very far back in your family tree, the chances start becoming more likely that you're not really genetically descended from these people than you are. And I have to say, I was surprised about him as a proctor, and I tested her first cousin, and I have the Proctor surname project. And I'm amazed that we match people that go back to the Proctor Jamestown. There's the Jamestown Proctors, sorry. There's a bunch of us who have paper trails, or at least speculative paper trails there, and we're all matching on the Y-DNA. And that is more of a surprise to me than the opposite. Like the fact that I do have a proven Proctor line all the way back to the 1600s, because I almost expect that there is going to be some sort of misattributed paternity or name change. There's so many different ways that can happen. So I think in all of our paper trails or our genealogical family trees, if truth were known, there'd be a lot of problems. So it depends how you want to look at it. They're still your family tree, but are they your genetic family tree?
Right.
And in a lot of cases, if we could really find out, we would learn that a lot of it is not. Our genetic family tree is quite different than the one that we've spent so long building and proving and supporting on paper.
So our time is almost up. Jen, do you have any last questions?
No, I've been learning so much and enjoying the conversation.
How about you, Terry?
No, actually, I look forward to talking again, though.
Well, as I said, when Finding Your Roots comes back on air, I can come in and we can talk about some of that too. Because
Cool.
time the vast majority of it ends up on the cutting room floor. And things are simplified for TV, of course, necessarily. So it will sometimes look like we jumped to some conclusion based on very little evidence. So I always like to talk about the work that we did behind the scenes and how much more research went into reaching those conclusions, because I want to make sure that people realize we're really, quite thorough as we can be in the limited amount of time that we have before we present something on TV as fact. So I'd love to come back and talk about that then, or we can talk.
That would be wonderful.
We can talk sooner. So we'll see. You know how busy I am, but it wasn't too hard once you pinned me down.
That's right. It just took a few months to get a date set.
It was well worth the wait.
Well, now that I've done it, it's easier because I know what I'm in for. So
Right.
this was pretty easy.
Well, thanks for being here. We really, really appreciate it. Like I said, I am passionate about it, and I think we now have two 100% devotees convertees over there. And hopefully everyone out there learned a little bit something new. And we look forward to seeing you on your next project or hearing from you in the future.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
You're very welcome. Next week, I want to remind the audience, we told you 2 weeks ago that this was our first of a 6-week marathon taping, because Who Do You Think You Are? We'll be coming back this Sunday, 9/8 Central on the Learning Channel, TLC. Jennifer Goodwin is up first, and we will be following her trail as she discovers a little bit more about her father's grandfather, so her paternal grandfather, and why he never talked about his family history. So until then, have a good evening, everyone. See you next week, and good luck with your genealogy. Bye.